and just talk about.
Just stand by. It'll only be a minute.
Okay. So we'll get started in just a few minutes with the Palestine Solidarity Politics Roundtable discussion today at the Palestine Museum US. We're just getting our technical
live streaming did not get affected.
Great. And Christmas co-host anyway, right?
Yeah, she held the
We
fort.
have a few more people joined us. Wally, Judy from Boston.
Okay, so we're back in business, and thanks to Krista for holding the fort and kept the session going. We're still live on Facebook. We don't have to log in again in Facebook. We just turned the recording on. We are recording this event on our computer as well. Okay, you have the floor, Christine.
Okay, so
Krista,
today's
Krista.
Today's roundtable on Palestine Solidarity Politics is sponsored by Middle East Crisis Committee in Connecticut and the U.S. Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. It's being held live at the Palestine Museum US in Connecticut, and I'm joining you from Madison, Wisconsin via Zoom. This roundtable discussion addresses multiple dimensions of Palestine solidarity politics that challenge Israeli settler colonialism, occupation, and apartheid. We have with us a number of guests. I'm going to introduce our moderator, known as JKK. She's a professor of American Studies and an affiliate faculty member in anthropology from Wesley University, and she teaches courses related to Wesley University. Teaches courses related to Indigenous sovereignty, settler colonial studies, anarchist history and activism, and critical race and ethnic studies. She's one of 6 co-founders of the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association. And she's a longtime activist, radio producer, and scholar. She's the author of Hawaiian Blood, Colonialism and the Politics of Sovereignty and Ingenuity, Paradoxes of Hawaiian Sovereignty, Land, Sex, and the Colonial Politics of State Nationalism, Speaking of Indigenous Politics, Conversations with Activist Scholars and Tribal Leaders. She is one of 6 co-founders of the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association and serves on the advisory board of the U.S. Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. She has a book project in progress, provisionally titled Indigenous Implications, Decolonizing Palestine Solidarity Politics. Welcome, and I turn the floor over to you to introduce our esteemed guests. Thank you everyone for joining us live and on Zoom. We're honored to have you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Faisal. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today on this gorgeous day here in Connecticut, and to all of you who have tuned in via Zoom. Thank you for joining us. My name is J.K. Haulani Kawanui, and thank you for the introduction, Krista. Aloha kako, Valina kako, greetings everyone. I want to thank Krista Brun for the introduction, and also hearty thanks to Faisal Saleh for hosting us here at the Palestine Museum. And thanks also to our 2 co-sponsors, the Middle East Crisis Committee, Connecticut, as well as the U.S. Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. The Palestine Museum rests on the traditional homeland of the Quinnipiac people. As some of you may know, after the Pequot War, settlers pushed the Quinnipiac to New England's first Native American reservations, known in places renamed East Haven, Branford, and Guilford, and part of Quinnipiac proper, North Haven. By the 18th century, after settler communities pushed to take these reservation lands for themselves, they expelled Quinnipiac further out geographically, and some went as far as what's known as Westbury, while others merged with either the Paugussett or the Tunxus in Farmington before folding in with the Brothertown Indians, whose settlers later were removed to Wisconsin along with the Stockbridge-Munsee of Massachusetts. As you can see, the indigenous peoples of this region were subjected to removal after removal, settler colonial ethnic cleansing that very much serves as a model for what we are seeing in Palestine today. However, I should also note that some Quinnipiac remained in Connecticut and remain in this region, living and working in shoreline towns. Today, the Quinnipiac are not presently organized as a tribal polity, nor recognized as one, but there are Quinnipiac descendants alive and well in the present day. For a more complete history of the tribe, you can see a book by John Menta titled The Quinnipiac. That's published by Peabody Museum of Natural History, Yale. And also beyond the Quinnipiac story, to learn more about the Native presence in the Atlantic Northeast, you can go online and search for the Native Northeast Research Collaborative. Again, that's the Native Northeast Research Collaborative, which is a project founded by Dr. Paul Grant Costa. It's an inclusive digital humanities endeavor that engages tribes, scholars, educators, students, and the general public. Now, to offer a brief framework for our conversation on Palestine solidarity politics. As we gather today, we are seeing the immediate aftermath of more Israeli airstrikes into Gaza. As Nora Erekat asks, quote, how long is it okay for the 11th most significant military to hold 2 million Palestinians hostage, destroy their humanitarian infrastructure, and pummel them with advanced weapons technology with impunity systematically before state actors actually act, end quote. That is state actors. We know that individuals and communities across the globe are acting. There are emergency demonstrations going on in cities all over the world right now as we're here today, including and not limited to Palestine. And let's not forget, Israel has also launched airstrikes into Lebanon. Citing Palestinian rocket fire to justify militarized assault, the latest onslaught should be understood as Israel's attempt to deflect from internal political turmoil as its citizens are protesting the fascist intensification of right-wing government, as evidenced by its push to overhaul the judiciary. And although we are seeing footage of Israeli citizens claiming they are protecting their democracy, we know that colonialism, occupation, and apartheid, the three prongs of brutal oppression of Palestinians, are not only all illegal, each is the very antithesis of democracy. In recent days, we have also seen the violent Israeli attacks on Palestinian worshipers at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Beyond the constant barrage in Jerusalem, we continue to see Israeli forces hunting resistance fighters in Nablus and Jenin. And just last month, a senior Israeli minister has said the Palestinian village of Huwara should be wiped out, days after far-right settlers went on a deadly rampage. Then there is Masafer Yatta, where Israel is trying to force over 1,000 Palestinians out of their homes to steal their lands. What we are seeing is the de facto annexation of the West Bank in real time, house by house, village by village, camp by camp. Unfortunately, I could go on and on. Since the start of 2023 alone, Israel has killed at least 93 Palestinians. That's a count that was reported several days ago. The need for an expanded Palestine solidarity movement is as crucial and urgent as ever. Palestine solidarity activists have coalesced around the 2005 Palestinian civil society call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, also known as BDS, against Israel until it complies with its international legal obligations. In 2005, Palestinian civil society organizations called for boycotts, divestment, and sanctions as a form of nonviolent pressure on Israel. I should note that the Palestinian call for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel came a year earlier in 2004. The BDS movement was launched by over 170 Palestinian unions, refugee networks, women's organizations, professional associations, popular resistance committees, and other Palestinian civil society bodies. The Palestinian BDS call, as many of you hopefully know, that call urges nonviolent pressure on Israel until it complies with international law by meeting three demands. The first is ending its occupation and colonization of all Arab lands and dismantling the wall. The second is recognizing the fundamental rights of the Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality. And the third is respecting, protecting, and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties, as stipulated in UN Resolution 194. Then there is now the backlash that we've seen I shouldn't just say now, an ongoing, but again, intensified backlash against the BDS movement. Not just in the United States, we're seeing this all across Europe and in the Americas, especially Canada and the US. As of 2021, and this has doubled, this is the latest data I found, 35 states in the US have passed bills and executive orders designed to discourage or completely ban boycotts of Israel. And many of them have been passed with broad bipartisan support. As the important work of Palestine Legal has documented, most anti-BDS laws have taken one of two forms: contract-focused laws requiring government contractors to promise that they are not boycotting Israel, and investment-focused laws mandating public investment funds to avoid entities boycotting Israel. Both the American Civil Liberties Union and the Council on American Islamic Relations have challenged many of these laws in court cases. People have been challenging anti-boycott laws in federal court, including Arkansas, Arizona, Georgia, Kansas, Maryland, and Texas. 4 federal district courts have ruled that these states' laws, all of which require contractors with the state to sign pledges that they don't boycott Israel, are likely unconstitutional, and that boycotts for Palestinian rights are protected by the First Amendment. However, in each of these cases, the state legislatures changed the laws that were challenged so that they no longer applied to the plaintiffs in order to moot the lawsuits. Then in February of this year, 2023, the Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal of a decision upholding Arkansas's anti-BDS law. As if that weren't enough, there are also the harassment and smear campaigns, as well as legal and violent threats across the country. But we're seeing this especially for the context in which we are all located in terms of our professional location across campuses of higher education. We're seeing people target faculty and students, as well as some administrators. And that is, again, coming with legal and violent threats. We're also seeing this in the form of what's known as lawfare, that is suing universities as well as academic associations and even individuals. And one of the things that has developed just in the last couple of years, starting with the Trump administration, but very much supported by the Biden administration, and prior to that, other Democratic politicians, is what's happening is you have these think tanks that have seemingly unending resources actually suing university administrations for supposed violation of civil rights protections for students who are saying that they're being discriminated against because there's a Students for Justice Students for Justice in Palestine on campus. And what you see happening is that administrations are now trying to fend off lawsuits from entities like the Brandeis Center. And what they're doing is leaving it to the administrations to put the smackdown on faculty and students around any kind of programming, teaching, organizing, so that those entities don't have to necessarily go after the groups themselves. They're letting the administrators of colleges and universities do that internally. So you have an internal academic and administrative push down and suppression and political repression. And that's happened for years, right? We've seen that with different campuses going after and actually banning SJP chapters on their own campuses, or going after faculty and not allowing, this nebulous category called academic freedom and letting people even teach with anything using the P word, right? And then in terms of academic associations, I myself have been subject to 2 different lawsuits, one that just got dismissed in the DC Superior Court a couple of weeks ago, and prior to that, one in the federal court, and that was a lawsuit against select plaintiffs, our senior colleagues in the field of American Studies. 4 white male senior colleagues sued the American Studies Association and several individual named defendants, of which I'm just one of several, for the American Studies Association, known as the ASA, passing through a vote of the entire membership was entitled to vote, and passed it by a 2-to-1 vote to pass an academic boycott resolution, merely saying that the ASA would not broker a partnership with an Israeli institution of higher ed for a conference or any kind of collaboration. Nothing binding on our individual members, nothing compelling any individual member to do anything, just saying that the ASA as an entity would not violate or cross the picket line, if you will, and would honor the academic boycott of Israel. and they sued us. And that case lasted for years. They filed that in 2016. It was only recently dismissed with prejudice in the federal courts, and they had filed a companion suit in the DC Superior Court in 2001 that just got dismissed. And so you can see the idea is to exhaust people at every level, right, and make it a situation. And academic boycott resolutions, some people have dismissed them as merely symbolic, and yet you can see that they can be very threatening because of the anti-normalization work that they do, right? And the ASA is one of many academic organizations that has passed academic boycott resolutions. And there is one that we'll hear about today around the American Anthropological Association is revisiting a vote on a resolution. So this is still very much an active topic in this country in higher education and in terms of scholarly assemblies. And now, before I introduce our speakers, I just want to also not let anything slip. I don't think we can talk about anything having to do with Palestine solidarity or the BDS movement without really looking at the core issue. And of course, just as Israeli settler colonialism, apartheid, and occupation, notice I'm using all three. And I understand settler colonialism is the main umbrella, with apartheid and occupation being two prongs in the service of a broader settler colonial project. I think that we must acknowledge that this political project, is first and foremost about land. And we can't because of that, let it go unmarked that the political ideology undergirding the Israeli political project is Zionism. I can't tell you how many programs I go to over and over again, and nobody wants to talk about the Z word. And to me, that's the core issue here. We're talking about a political ideology to try and justify this violence of the taking. And let's be clear, it's not just Jewish Zionism. We must also account for the role of Christian Zionism as a central force, especially in terms of the core pillar of US support for Israel. And now we'll turn to our speakers. I've asked each presenter to speak for 8 minutes. And then after that, they will have a chance to dialogue with each other before we open it up to Q&A. And I will introduce them all right now in the order in which they'll appear on the program. We have three presenters, myself here in person. We also have Rana Daher joining us on Zoom from the West Bank. Thank you for being here. I know that you're navigating quite a time difference, so mahalo and aloha, Rana. First, we will hear from Amal Bishara, who is an associate professor and chair of the anthropology department at Tufts University. She is the author of a book titled Crossing a Line: Laws, Violence, and Roadblocks to Palestinian Political Expression, recently published on Stanford University Press in 2022. And that is about different conditions of expression for Palestinian citizens of Israel and Palestinians in the West Bank. She also writes about popular refugee politics in the West Bank. I also want to acknowledge her first book is titled Backstories, U.S. News and Palestinian Politics, also on Stanford University Press, and that's from 2013. And that is an ethnography of the production of U.S. news during the Second Palestinian Intifada. She is the president of the Middle East section of the American Anthropological Association. After that, we will hear from Cynthia Franklin, who is professor of English at the University of Hawaii. She co-edits the journal titled Biography, as well as, and is an author of 2 books. One is, and a third one that's coming out in June. The third one, I'll tell you first, is titled Narrating Humanity, Life Writing and Movement Politics from Palestine to Mauna Kea. And that again is coming out in June. After participating in 2013 in a faculty development seminar on the West Bank with the Palestinian American Research Center, she co-edited a special issue of biography titled Life in Occupied Palestine. And that is entirely accessible online. It's not behind any paywall or apartheid wall or settler colonial annexation wall. Again, that's a special issue of biography titled Life in Occupied Palestine. And for the past decade, she's been a very central part and hardworking part of the organizing collective of the U.S. academic and cultural boycott of Israel. As part of her work for the campaign, she worked on academic boycott initiatives for the American Studies Association, I mentioned earlier, as well as the Modern Language Association, and is also the founder, one of the core founders of Students and Faculty for Justice in Palestine at the University of Hawaii. After that, we'll hear from Sarah Imud, who is a Chicana Palestinian anthropologist whose work uplifts the lived experiences, histories, and political contributions of Palestinian women, and Palestinian feminism. Her scholarship has been published in American Anthropologist, Feminist Anthropology, Cultural Anthropology, and numerous other journals, including biography. Her research has been supported by the National Science Foundation, the Palestinian American Research Center, the Wenner-Gren Foundation for Anthropological Research, and the National Endowment for Humanities. She is a founding member of the Palestinian Feminist Collective and is assistant professor of anthropology at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. Last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Rana Daher, who is tuning in via Zoom, who is an associate professor of history and contemporary Arab studies at Birzeit University, where she is also director of the museum at Birzeit University in Palestine. Her research interests include the history and historiography of colonialism, nationalism, and cultures of resistance. She earned her doctorate in history from the University of Chicago and has since published in several venues, including the Journal of Palestine Studies, Jerusalem Quarterly, Settler Colonial Studies, and Native American and Indigenous Studies. She has a book in progress titled Lifta and Resisting the Museumification of Palestine, Indigenous History of the Nakba, and that is contracted with the University of North Carolina Press. Her second book is something also in progress, provisionally titled The Barak Revolt, Constructing a History of Resistance in Palestine, which argues that the 1929 revolt was the first sign in the Mandate period of sustained massed resistance to the settler colonial project. And indeed, Rana is tracking that with the contemporary resistance right now and tracing the long genealogy of resistance emanating from that period into the present through Jerusalem. So please, let's welcome our speakers, and we'll turn it over to each person who will just go right in a row. After that, I'll move the computer down to where we're sitting, and we'll have some crosstalk, and then we'll open it up to audience members here at the museum and those of you on Zoom. So welcome to all our speakers. Thank you for being here.
Thanks to, thank you so much to Kaolani for organizing, introducing so powerfully today, Faisal Saleh for hosting us, and to all of you for being here. I have to say it's truly an honor and a delight to be in conversation with these incredible people from whom I have learned for so long. And I know they're also the kind of people that I will continue to learn from year after year, new things and new conversations. So I'm so grateful. So I'm trying to not do a full read here and to speak a little bit more. Oh, and I'm going to share a few images. Let me reopen that after the computer restarted. I think I can do that. Okay, just 1 second here. It probably downloads here. Yeah, here it is. I found it.
It's open already.
Okay, great.
We need to share it.
Yeah. Got it.
You have to, pick the one you want.
Okay. Okay, so.
On the green.
All right, this may not look, oh, this is, okay, I'm sorry. I'm used to a slightly different setup. So let me see what I can do here.
Don't play it. Because you lose the control. Just click on the thumbnails on the side.
Okay, is there any way to get rid of this thing? It's okay if not.
Okay.
The sidebar, that's okay, no problem.
The sidebar is what's gonna happen. If in case you want to jump around, you can use the sidebar or use
Okay.
the arrows to go up and down.
Great, thank you so much.
Perfect.
Okay, so today I want to talk about, I'm so glad that Rana will also be talking about Nakbas and standing in the face of these ongoing catastrophes, especially as we are in April and moving toward May, when Palestinians commemorate the Nakba in so many different places and in so many different ways. As you heard, I just finished a book on Palestinian fragmentation, thinking about the way in which Israeli settler colonialism fragments Palestinians into different groups and makes resistance more difficult and makes collective expression and many forms of collectivity much more difficult, down from the small level of the family to the big level of a protest into the larger level of political representation. And this is something that I think as a Palestinian people, we need to be thinking more and more about the creative ways of rebuilding collectivity. With my particular positionality as a US-based Palestinian with family ties on two sides of the Green Line, inside Israel's 1948 territories, 48 Palestinians, and with kin ties also in the West Bank, and as an ethnographer, I decided that one of the things that I could do as a researcher and writer is to look at two sides of the Green Line, as opposed to looking at all the dimensions of Palestinian, fragmentation due to Israeli settler colonialism, which would of course include Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and beyond. I've tried to look at these two different kinds of Palestinian lives and modes of expression and forms of resistance. And I know that I do that with a great deal of privilege. It comes home to me every day because I did most of this work based in Aida refugee camp in the West Bank, and people that I loved very dearly, including my partner, but also including many other people that I love very dearly there, would be unable to come with me on my field trips, when I would go to do, field work inside 48. So I feel very deeply that this was a privilege to do this work, and thus it's also a deep obligation for me to share and speak about it as I am able to do so. So today I want to talk a little bit about Nakba days and Nakba commemorations. And the interesting thing about Nakba commemorations, Nakba of course means catastrophe, the great catastrophe of Palestinian dispossession in 1948. And I think that in some ways it can seem like it's so easy to belittle the forms of resistance that we're involved with. Oh, the boycott is just symbolic. Oh, Nakba Day commemorations, they happen every year and people get out the same posters every year. But in fact, these coming togethers are extremely important and powerful events in which Palestinians are able to do a number of things. One is to just practice gathering, how difficult it is for Palestinians to safely come together. We've seen over and over again the threats that Palestinians face when they gather in the streets, in almost any place that they are, right? So it's a practice of gathering together and showing that we can come together. Also, because Palestinians are not able to come to any one place to commemorate the Nakba together, and that's not just Palestinians in historic Palestine, or not just even Palestinians in 48 or Palestinians in the West Bank. There are obstacles to people gathering even within those places. So it turns out that there are many, many different Nakba commemorations that happen each year. There's a downside to that, which is that, the numbers are smaller, if you will, right? It's not everyone all together, but the upside is the Palestinians are learning each year about a new history of dispossession or ongoing dispossession, or they're deepening their knowledge, or they're deepening their connection to those places. And that's a really, really powerful thing. So they're learning about local spaces and histories of dispossession. And then they're also, in doing this thing that in some ways seems repetitive, right? We're also developing new ways of thinking about the Nakba. So perhaps 20 years ago, people thought about Nakba commemoration, right? Now people think about the Nakba as an ongoing structure of dispossession, which of course resonates with thinking about settler colonialism in general as a structure and not an event, to draw on Patrick Wolf's powerful formulation that has been picked up in so many and thought through in so many different ways. Palestinians also see the Nakba as ongoing, as a structure that continues. And so this phrase, Nakba mustamirra, is really key. So I'll talk to you a little bit about two different commemorations that I've been to, although I'm watching time also, okay. In Al-Walaja, which is a Palestinian village that's now in the West Bank. Al-Walaja was a village that was located inside the Green Line. And in the war, Palestinians were pushed off their lands, their original village, and went to live in their agricultural lands, and then built a new village on those agricultural lands. So that's why you can see in this map that the Green Line is north of Al-Walaja, the village. The red line is the course of the wall. The blue are the settlements. So when we went there, I went there for two different Nakba Day commemorations in 2011 and in 2014. And I was embarking that day, as on many days, from Aida refugee camp. And that's an interesting point of embarkation, because Palestinians in Aida refugee camp know and feel themselves to be living in one of the more intensely militarized locations. It's been called the most tear-gassed place in the world, actually, by Berkeley researchers. So it's a place that's not easy and comfortable to live, and it's overcrowded. And so in some ways, going to Al-Walaja is like
in the springtime, this is beautiful. Like, this is a beautiful place to be and to walk and to gather and to learn. And they go there sometimes to like enjoy a spring, for example, as well, right? But also to go there and to learn about that specific history of dispossession is a really powerful thing, because Palestinians in Al-Walaja are also being dispossessed of their land, not only in the Nakba of 1948, but ongoing as through home demolitions, because the most of the village, or all of the village that was built after 1948 is also under threat of Israeli demolition, because it didn't have permits that Israel refused to give. So Palestinians are learning about that particular history, listening to these local activists, the brave and persistent women and men who are at nearly every demonstration, and who often serve as guides and hosts for international visitors. And we look at these homes and we wonder, when was this house destroyed? This obviously is a news picture. It's not an image from the day of the Nakba Day procession. We arrived at the top of the hill, and I'll just say that in 2011, people went down, but they did not go that far down. We went down to this spring that many people knew and enjoyed, but then came back up. And that day, we also came back to Aida refugee camp and found that PA soldiers were gathering to prevent people from protesting in Aida refugee camp, right? So this was a year in 2011 during the Arab revolts when Palestinians actually crossed the northern border from Lebanon into the Galilee, which is sort of stunning when you think about it. But the PA was preventing them from entering Jerusalem from Aida refugee camp, right? So this is why also gathering means so much, because it's a way of feeling, how does power work now and here? Who is stopping me? And how shall I organize then the next protest, right? But a few years later, we were back and we walked by some of those same places again. Took the same walk really, but this time people went down to the road with flags and sitting in the road, even though this road actually had become even less accessible to Palestinians in the area due to the building of the separation wall and Israeli confiscation of that spring. And they engaged in a confrontation with the Israeli jeeps that were stationed there until we returned up the hill. So this was a day. The other thing about these Nakba Day commemorations is not only that they teach about local history and our practice of gathering, but they also are a way of challenging settler colonial fragmentation in different ways. So I should say that sorry, my slide's ahead of me here, but in Al-Walaja, the way in which the challenging was happening was by, moving across a line that the Israeli army had said, you may not pass, In fact, we did not cross the Green Line that day because the Green Line is up a little bit further, but it nonetheless was saying, it was a movement towards Jerusalem, right? And a rejection of that kind of fragmentation and closure. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a second protest commemoration of the Nakba in Libya, where it is inside Israel's 1948 territories. And this is a gathering that happens each year. And the kinds of gathering and commemoration that was happening that was so powerful to me in a way of gathering Palestinians in a way that challenged the Green Line was that we saw these pictures of internally displaced people were gathering at this site, but they were doing so in a way that evoked the presence of the millions of refugees who cannot gather to commemorate the Nakba in Palestine, right? So through these images and through other languages about return as a process, they were returning in this way and symbolizing a much greater return of all Palestinian refugees. In closing, I just want to talk about something that I haven't gotten to write about yet, but that has been an enlivening and important part of my life the last several years, going to the National Day of Mourning at Plymouth Rock, which has been held since 1970. And for me, for Palestinians, one of the sayings that Palestinians have on Nakba Day, particularly for Palestinians inside 48, citizens of Israel, is your day of independence is our day of catastrophe. It's a total rejection of the framework of Zionist history, right? And here, the National Day of Mourning is held on the day that many people, most Americans, are celebrating Thanksgiving,
right? So it's saying the day of Thanksgiving is our day of mourning and of the ongoing catastrophe and violence of settler colonialism. One of the key ideas of this gathering, we are not vanishing, we are not conquered, we are as strong as ever. And I'll also say that I'm inspired by this because it helps me think about this ongoing struggle over hundreds of years. And again, this practice of coming together. And also because it helps me think about politics beyond the nation state and a liberatory politics that is feminist and that, is about building towards a more healthy world for everybody. So some of the big themes are homophobia is not native to these shores. That's on that pink sign back there. About climate justice. And I will say, just as, it is a practice of gathering. So every year on that morning, I get to see so many important, so many dear friends and activists that I wouldn't get to see if I were doing a traditional American Thanksgiving, but we come out together and think about this history together in a way that enlivens my thinking, not only about Boston, but about Palestine as well. So I will stop there. I could talk more about the boycott movement, which I think does similar work of working across lines of fragmentation, both within Palestine and around the globe, but I know I've gone a little over anyway, so thank you.
I'm hoping to disentangle my mask from my ear. There we go. Thank you so much, Amal. I just continue to learn so much from you and Sarah and Rana and Kehaulani. It's such an honor to be in conversation with you all, and thank you to the Palestine Museum for this opportunity. So I too want to talk about solidarity. It's a great place for me to pick up from where you left off. And also about how one goes about achieving the aims of BDS, which Kehaulani elaborated what those kind of 3 planks are. And I want to talk about how that happens not only through wins, such as academic boycott resolutions or the passage of church and student divestment bills, or by getting Sabra hummus off the shelves or halting Elbit operations. As tremendously important as those wins are, equally significant is the work that makes these victories possible. So I want to kind of take a few minutes to think about how behind every campaign, as well as every public-facing event or protest, is the work of political education and building solidarity that creates that creates foundational conditions, not conditional foundations, for liberation. So today then I want to talk about how BDS, in concert with other movements, is moving us towards a free Palestine through strengthening what Stephen Salaita calls internationalism, and there's a slash there. And actually, I'm going to show his book right here. He defines internationalism as a commitment to mutual liberation, which consists of an amalgamation, I'm quoting here, of solidarity, transnationalism, intersectionality, kinship, or intercommunalism. In thinking about this internationalism, I'm especially interested in the important role that stories have to play. Stories do not, of course, always serve progressive purposes. Dominant narratives perpetuate and often lend cover to colonial ways of being. And we know these stories in the context of Palestine very well. The way Zionist narratives pit Jewish humanity in a kind of zero-sum equation against Arab or Palestinian inhumanity, and cast Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East, and simultaneously as a land without a people for a people without a land. Zionist narratives convert Israel's practices of settler colonialism, land grabs, structural genocide, the horrific violence that Kehaulani was kind of discussing in her introduction, into stories in which Jewish victims are defending themselves against interchangeably Hamas or Muslim, Palestinian, or Arab terrorists or anti-Semites. But so too, stories help us imagine into being decolonial futures. The stories emerging from liberation movements, including for a free Palestine, narrate decolonial ways of being human that are deliberately intersectional and committed to acting in solidarity with other struggles, and in the way that Amal, you were just talking about, and to the understanding that none of us are free until all of us are free. I believe these narratives of human being and becoming and the relationships they make possible are not ancillary, but they're central to political organizing. And I want to talk a little bit today on the relationships between Hawaii and Palestine, a context that is familiar to me, and on ways people in these two sites of settler colonialism and occupation support and participate in each other's freedom struggles, in a solidarity that is premised not on political pragmatism, but kinship. As theorized by Salaita, kinship is a central component to internationalism and to BDS. He notes that this kinship is, quote, more than an emotion. It entails the intellectual rigors of theorization and political labor. I would add that as we build this kinship by sharing stories that describe and materialize practices of abolitionist and decolonial love. And, sorry here to the Zionists that need to desperately believe BDS is fueled by anger and affinity for terrorism, anti-Semitism, all those negative things. And I want to give a quick example that comes from work that I've done this past decade as an anti-Zionist Jew, a member of US ACB and co-founding member of Students and Faculty for Justice in Palestine at the University of Hawaii. And also as a settler ally who has contributed what I can to Hawaiian struggles for Ea, which means sovereignty, rising, breathing, to illustrate my understanding of the power that comes from the cross-pollination of different struggles and movements and stories' role in this process. As part of a series we've named Decolonial November, each year since 2013, SFJP at UH has committed to bringing out a Palestinian visitor to further the work of BDS and to build solidarity from Hawaii to Palestine. And Rana has come as part of that. Kehalani has participated in those. Sarah came recently. Hopefully Amal will get you out there. Others who have come include Yusuf Al-Jamal, Sumaya Awad, Ramzi Baroud, Noor Erakat, Remy Kanazi, Tariq Lathan, Steve Salaita, Naderesh Alhoub, and also Noor Douglas and Mai Hassan, undergrads from Birzeit University, who came as part of a Right to Education tour. The Decolonial November visits have included university and church talks and roundtables, as well as poetry and music nights at the Kamakakuakalani Center for Hawaiian Studies that have put Kanaka Maoli, or Native Hawaiians, and Palestinian scholars and activists into conversation. Perhaps more important, though, than these formal events have been the conversations that have taken place between organized events and actions. These have unfolded during detours, farm visits, plane rides, karaoke nights, campus lunches, potluck dinners, hookah sessions, beach gatherings, and while talking story under the stars of Mauna Kea in solidarity with Kia'i, protecting their sacred mountain from the construction of a 30-meter telescope. From these exchanges, I have learned that sharing stories and creating friendships has everything to do with organizing and movement building that connects humans and lands that exist oceans and continents apart. I've also learned that participating in different movements need not divide energy and support, but multiply it, as it also illuminates articulations among movements. These exchanges between Hawaii and Palestine have provided me an opportunity to think about the boycott movement less as a campaign and more as an international practice of solidarity and process of education in which lasting relations are built through the sharing of stories. I want to close with a quick illustration of how this works, and I hope in conversation after my co-panelists might add their perspectives because they've been directly part of this, and so much of what I've learned comes from them. In October 2020, SFJP at UH organized a seminar on Palestine censorship and Layla Khaled as part of US ACB's Day of Protest, after Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, and San Francisco State University all shut down Rabab Abdulhadi and Tomomi Kinukawa's open classroom because freedom fighter Layla Khaled was participating in it. Zoom, with complicity from our university, then censored our webinar on censorship. It was a direct result of the connections that we've built from Hawaii to Palestine during decolonial Novembers that led, at the brilliant suggestion of Kalekoa Ka'eo, to SFJP at UH making a video where tenured faculty members read out the words of Khaled. The process that went into making this video included discussions of what it meant for Kiahi, or protectors who have committed to principles of kapu aloha, which is meeting violence with fierce but non-resistant, fierce but non-violent forms of aloha, to read these words, which insist on Palestinians' rights to take up armed resistance in response to Israeli war crimes against crimes against humanity and its many other breaks with international law. What was clear from this action was how relations of friendship and trust built through stories enabled the recognition and strengthening of a shared politics, even when the contexts are different. And in particular, I'm kind of thinking about how during discussions and plannings of this video, we were recalling stories that were told during decolonial November dinners that involved Palestinians resisting attack by the Israeli military by throwing a refrigerator over a balcony at an Israeli tank. Ali, if you're listening, you know that story because it's yours. Or another of how residents of the Haisha refugee camp confined to their homes during a military invasion passed ingredients through windows house to house to help a neighbor bake a cake. These stories cannot be stolen or censored by Zionists. Occasioned by shared political convictions, they strengthen these convictions and the willingness to show up for each other. Through sharing stories, we are able to thicken what in her poem Sons, Haunani K. Trask calls the rope of resistance, as together people narrate into being freer and more expansive ways to being human. And I want to close with something that Rana said during her time after a visit to Mauna Kea, and it appears in the Allies section of the Mauna Kea Syllabus Project. And her presence in that syllabus project is itself a kind of important practice of solidarity. And I think it speaks to the movement building BDS helps to ignite and itself is energized. So I asked Rana what kind of future she saw unfolding during the time she spent at Mauna Kea, a parking lot turned place of refuge, organized in accordance with principles of Aloha Aina, mutual aid, and radical care. And Rana said, as I engage in this decolonialism as our practice and our praxis, we are constantly trying to free ourselves. And I don't know what that will look like, but we are doing it together. So I really wanted to include those words of Rana because I think of them often and they're just so beautiful. So thank you. I'm going to now turn things over to Sarah.
Everyone. Thank you for those beautiful words. I want to thank Kehaulani Kauanui for their incredible efforts in organizing this conversation, to my friends and colleagues on this panel, and really it is a gift to call you friends. As you've been saying, movements are built through friendship, and I deeply admire you all and cherish the friendships that we've built through movement building over the years. To Faisal and folks at the Palestine Museum, US ACBI, and to everyone in this room, but especially my mom who's here. She was the first one to teach me about feminism. She was the first person to teach me about feminism, and she taught me that we have to take, every opportunity that we can to speak out against violence and injustice, no matter how small. So thank you, Mom. I'm going to read something that I wrote last night, maybe out of anger, maybe out of grief, watching things unfold in such a predictable way back home. I'm disturbed, as I'm sure many of us are, by the almost total erasure of a Palestinian narrative every time we witness the breaking of the surface of the structure of colonial violence. Lately, I've been more intentional about centering Palestinian life and life-making in the midst of these genocidal moments, which I think is inherently a feminist act. So here's a gesture toward that imperative. At this very moment, Palestinian women are in open rebellion. At this moment, there are women who are standing strong and dignified while performing their Muslim identity and maintaining their sacred connection with Al-Aqsa in the midst of ongoing incursions and the brutal violence of Israeli military and settlers in Al-Quds, Jerusalem. At this moment, there is a Palestinian mother in Sinjil caring for her family and recreating a sense of home for her children, a sense of safety and belonging,
even though their home was burned to the ground by Jewish settlers with them inside just days ago. At this very moment, there is a woman in Gaza gathering her passport, photographs, and other important documents and memories, preparing for the possibility that she and her family will have to leave her home to escape the threat of another Israeli bombardment. At this moment here in the United States, there are Palestinian women studying and teaching our histories in the face of harassment and bullying, in the face of weaponization of accusations of anti-Semitism, meant to silence their critique of Israeli colonial violence. At this moment, there are young women and queer folks organizing with their peers for BDS and for Palestinian liberation on college campuses, speaking their truths out loud in hostile spaces, even though they are facing anti-boycott laws, along with threats of rape, sexual violence, and death. At this moment, there are Palestinian women and queerkin struggling to create spaces of freedom and autonomy, spaces of safety where they can express their beauty and humanity. We are striving to carve spaces to tell ourselves that we are worthy, to raise children who know that they are worthy in a world that tells them that they are not. Saidiya Hartman talks about writing a narrative, quote, from the nowhere of the ghetto and the nowhere of the utopia, end quote. These everyday narratives and realities are the fragmented yet fruitful grounds from which we speak as Palestinian women, from the nowhere space of colonial violence that has constructed us as monstrous, non-human others who deserve to be criminalized and killed, from the nowhere place of an unintelligibility of our suffering to the nowhere space of our utopic dreams and desires for a future Palestine. We know that the Zionist project seeks to control our bodies, our sexualities, and our stories because of our life-giving capacities. We know that the Zionist project attempts to disappear us because our very existence is a threat to the mythologized notion of a land without a people for a people without a land. We understand that settler colonialism constructs us as Native women as a threat to its very existence because we are powerful. We understand that settler colonialism and state violence are invested in destroying not only our capacity to imagine life and a future in our homeland, but also to desire it. The fear of our desires, writes Audre Lorde, quote, keeps them suspect and indiscriminately powerful. The fear that we cannot grow beyond whatever distortions we may find within ourselves keeps us docile and loyal and obedient, externally defined, and leads us to accept many facets of our oppression, end quote. The colonizer knows this well. When we begin to live in touch with the power of our desires, we allow that power to inform and, quote, illuminate our actions upon the world around us, end quote. An orientation to desire, as Indigenous feminist scholar Tuck describes, is, quote, longing about a present that is enriched by both the past and the future. It is integral to our humanness. It is not only the painful elements of social and psychic realities, but also the textured acumen and hope, end quote. Hence, Palestinian feminism is invested in the necessity of continuing to love life and each other. We continue to believe that Palestinians have the right, like any other people, to be free. We continue to desire a future Palestine, to desire a future in Palestine. In their everyday praxis, Palestinian women enact an undisciplined orientation toward that desire. They nurture collective emergent selves and diasporic constellations of co-resistance, love, and care. In doing so, they illuminate how we can reclaim our power, quote, in the face of seemingly endemic and intractable oppression, end quote. Reclaiming our power, even in the quotidian spaces of everyday life, through rebuilding home, through loving and protecting our kin, nurturing and rerouting connections to land and sacred space, telling our stories, and teaching the next generation how to survive and resist colonial domination and violence, and creating possibilities for justice and healing within our communities, within ourselves. These acts fundamentally shift dynamics of power and landscapes of struggle. We see this, and we see this power as we face continued backlash in spaces that demand our silence or invisibility, when we refuse to disappear. Refusal is a generative concept. As Devin Atalla and Urmitapa Dutta write, refusal is, quote, using imagination, love, and vision to articulate and dream possibilities. It is regrounding ourselves in a present not only marked by the past, but also by the imminence of that which is still unsaid, unthought, unlived. It is desire and longing and action. It is remapping, remaking, weaving together and traversing a landscape of decolonial praxis that is rooted in lived experiences and inherited legacies of struggle and survival, end quote. Under ongoing conditions of the genocidal elimination of our people, decolonial feminist praxis is an adamant refusal of Zionist settler colonialism and its entwined logics of white supremacy, anti-Blackness, heteropatriarchy, imperialism, and a racialized economy of suffering and death. At the same time, decolonial feminist praxis is animated by the urgency to nurture and create alternative ways of being, knowing, and belonging to each other, not rooted in hierarchical structures of race, gender, nation, and humanity intertwined with the coloniality of power. I want to end by playing a song that was composed by Palestinian feminist organizers back home from the Talat movement during the 2021 uprising, but sung by the US-based Palestinian feminist collective at a gathering last year in California. So here's the song. I hope you can hear it. So we can talk about the lyrics a little bit later, but sorry.
We get a link to it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Chat.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, so the lyrics of this feminist freedom song, and I'll just recount a couple of the lyrics. One of them says, I don't want a dress, nor do I desire a dress. I want Palestine's flag to flutter over Ashkelon prison. Another says, I don't want a wedding procession, nor do I desire a wedding procession. I want Palestine to stop only being the West Bank, so us to continue to envision and imagine Palestine as being all of Palestine. These lyrics give depth to an insurgent feminist imaginary of Palestinian rebellion that is ongoing. The performance of this freedom song, like the lyrics themselves, illustrate the co-constitutiveness and constellations of anti-colonial resistance, kinship, and love performed by Palestinian women across the homeland and the Shatats. And I hope that we can talk a little bit in our discussion about the ongoing feminist movements back home and in the US. Thank you.
Shall I begin?
Yeah, I think you're good. Let me just make this bigger.
Sure, go ahead, Rana.
Okay. It's always so weird not being there. Okay, so thank you for including me in this discussion. And thank you all, my comrade sisters on this panel. Special thanks to Kehlani for all the labor of bringing us together and the museum for hosting this roundtable. As we sit here together in April, I'm sorry, I'm just getting over COVID, so my voice is a little shaky. In April of 2023, and as we open conversations about solidarity, I have to begin in my head and with you with the longer history, Because as Kabalani mentioned at the very beginning, we're speaking of over a century of settler colonial violence in Palestine, of which dispossession and forced removal is, was, and continues to be at its core. And I have to remind myself just how brutal and atmospheric the violence of Zionism is. Or I don't have to remind myself of how brutal and atmospheric the violence of Zionism is. It was a war of ongoing, and it remains a war that is ongoing, of forced removal, death, destruction, and it continues. And part of who we are and where we are is part of how this war has been waged against us as a people. This discussion has already been incredibly vital. Amal, when you were talking about fragmentation, you were talking about how they keep trying to break us, which is, when you were talking, the Tarawih prayer was, I'm sitting here in Ramallah, so I could hear the mosque from my apartment. And this particular Ramadan, and as we know in Palestine, Ramadan, as Shab Jadid says, does not come for free. The Zionist violence is always turned up a notch during Ramadan. And you were talking, and this beautiful prayer was coming through my window. And I was thinking what's going to happen in Jerusalem when the prayers are over, because what happens every night in Jerusalem for the past week. They keep trying to break us. That's what we call the ongoing Nakba. But we are a people, and we have enduring peoplehood. And that's the past and the present of Palestine and Palestinians. And Amal, when you talk about coming together and gathering, I want to tell you and thank you that you helped me overcome my own ambivalence about commemoration. As a historian, I once, or used to cringe at the notion of commemoration as if we need one day a year to remember what happens to us every day of every year. But the way that you changed my thinking about that in terms of gathering is how I describe in my own language what is our ongoing return as a people. And so I want to thank you, Amal, for that. And I will continue to thank you. Cindy, when you talk about, let's not talk about the wins and let's talk about what's behind every campaign. What you describe as foundational conditions is how I can try to describe my own life. Stories, and you taught me, Cindy, how stories matter and how they can actually merge into imagining decolonial futures. That's where I came up with in my own mind, trying to search for stories, not only as a political organizer, not only in search of ongoing kinship, but also in search of my own past in the present. Sara, thank you for your beautiful words. And I would like everybody in this room to go online and read the Palestine Feminist Collective's love letter to Palestine. Because through your words, Sara, and through that collective's words of a love letter, I am learning how to turn rage and how to understand my own rage as part of my own love. And as you described at this moment, and it's one moment after another, and how these moments combine and bleed into each other, how we work to remember, but it's also working to remember what we cannot always remember. Writing the story from the nowhere place that you described is also about the adamant refusal for nourishing life. So Sada, thank you for helping me learn how to nourish life, because this year has been relentless. To be honest, every year feels relentless. But in 2023 alone, as Kaholani mentioned, the unyielding violence of Zionism has been and continues to be beyond description, or at least beyond my ability to describe. The urgent situation remains always urgent. And I sometimes wonder how we can even breathe through it. I teach at Birzeit University, which is right outside of where I live in Ramallah. We teach and live under occupation. It's no simple task or feat to teach, to live, or even to describe what life is like. It cannot easily be encompassed in words. But as was pointed out by my sisters earlier, part of solidarity is not just boycott and divestment, as important as that is, but it's about understanding, working for, and towards mutual support and love. Our long stories, the history of Palestinians, is as beautiful as it is a tragic set of stories. A historian like myself might feel the need to give you a timeline or describe the past in phrases. And I'm trying my hardest not to do that tonight because I think it might be boring. But for tonight and for this discussion, I think it's better that we focus on the work that we do every day. Work we do every day. And I want to invite us to think about this work as part of our everyday. Specifically, since we're in a museum setting here, or you are, I'm in my house, I want to invite everyone here to come to another museum, to Birzeit University Museum, where I happen to be the director. In visiting us, either in person or online, you can see that Palestine is not just a case study or a place that absorbs theory or is ready to be theorized upon. We are vital, and through our vitality, we generate and nurture thinking. I would like to briefly mention 3 major aspects of the work of the museum and hope you all will investigate further and hope that we can do so in discussion together. Our most recent exhibition at the Birzeit University Museum was titled "The Man Who Talked Until He Disappeared, Bani Abidi in Palestine," and it featured the work of a Karachi-based artist, Bani Abidi. Now, Bani couldn't come into Palestine, and I can't leave Palestine. So part of the reason that we did this was to show how we can do this in spite of colonial borders. Through this exhibition, which was entirely reproduced here locally, we refused together to have her work travel across colonial borders. And instead, we worked to open horizons and hopefully expand the boundaries of a conversation about solidarity. And if I can just quote really quickly from the concept note of the exhibition. Through this survey of Bani Abidi's work, we navigated the barriers and impasses imposed on the e-mobility of the oppressed. Walking among the work of Bani's imagination, the space of the museum was transformed into one that connects the metaphysical as well as the physical in waiting at borders and boundaries. We witness, observe, and experience travel in a world dominated by control. We walked among barriers imposed by the absurd and fantastical iterations of security through a contemplation of masculine power that holds us in anticipation of performance. As we continue to wait for the real and the disappeared, we walked into an intimate presentation of bittersweet letters lost in archives of all the seemingly small and huge obstacles of the violences of modernity. Bani took us into the theater of the absurd, where humor seems to be a useful anecdote for the fanatical ridiculousness of official powers. Her work travels between a deep commentary on militaristic nationalism, the masculinity of power, the absurdity and fear-mongering of borders, the audacity of the imposition of security on everyday life. All the while, we do not lose a sense of the somber reality of oppressed people navigating through life to survive. With a keen sense of humor and an ability to expose the brutal audacity of everyday navigation, through all of its ironies and contradictions, Bani's work invites us to think otherwise. Every piece in the exhibition, as I mentioned earlier, was reproduced locally at Birzeit and transformed to reveal and expose the contradictions of contemporary life from Karachi to Palestine and all the stations in between. Part of the reason of why we did that exhibition was to not only defy borders, but was to nurture and generate conversations amongst ourselves. As we move into a new idea of experimentation this semester with the displays and exhibitions, we will feature the groundbreaking work of Ramallah-based artist Reem Masri. And it is our hope through working through discussing and actually fostering conversations, we can show how the world how politically vital and boundaryless solidarity can be. Interestingly, we are not alone, nor in a bubble. The most recent exhibition featured at the Qattan Foundation in Ramallah under the title Unsolidarities asked provocative questions about the boundaries of this notion historically. I do not see boundaryless and boundaries as contradiction. Rather, I think they're in complement, and I think they speak to the conversation that we're having today. Another aspect of the work of the Birzeit Museum is engaging our collections. We have 3 main collections held by the museum, and through this work, we're constantly thinking about how not to reproduce the model of a museum that is essentially a symbolic hold of colonial power. We do not celebrate the end of us as a people, nor put us into the prehistorical mode of before. Rather, we face the challenges of collections. I would like to only briefly mention our Tawfiq Kanaan collection. You can follow this work on our website, but allow me here just to gesture that part of this work has been to foster an intellectual community, first amongst Palestinians worldwide. We are 14 million as a people. And it is a constant thought that while collections are cool, how can we engage them in a way that defies boundaries and the access or lack thereof, in ways like we did with the exhibition with Bani, defy the borders that we cannot cross. I want to mention, this is all stuff I'm seriously excited about, and I do hope it can become a means of sharing amongst us all. With Palestinian sovereignty and self-determination reified through this sharing, but it is a constant challenge because institutionalized work is just that. It is an institution, and as such, it can become static. But the institution can also be a means of how to share. I hope we can keep that question in mind from Connecticut to Palestine, that the questions in mind that we work through every day, through the days and nights of the brutal terror that is Israeli settler colonialism. And with that, I hope we can begin this discussion.
Thank you, Rana.
Thank you so much, Rana. That was outstanding. All of our presenters, what great presentations. Thank you, round of applause for everybody. Okay, we're just gonna have a moment of transition. Yes, thank you.
You can grab the keyboard and the mouse.
Okay.
I can reconnect them. They're wireless, actually. They don't need to be connected. Okay.
Hi, ladies.
Hi. Hey.
It's fine, Rod. It's fine.
All right. So, all right. So what we're going to do, we've got some structural constraints here in terms of mic, computer, physical layout. We're going to have some crosstalk with the panelists. And we'll just be shifting the screen a little bit, trying to keep our eyes on the audience here. And
we're getting some feedback from you. 1 second here. We need to change the view.
Well, I did pin run on me, that's why I.
Oh, okay. Well, let's unpin here.
Remove him.
It's in speaker mode. You don't need to do that. We'll leave it on speaker mode. Whoever speaks takes the big screen.
okay. So I'll turn it this way to our three speakers who are here. You maybe, I don't know if you feel comfortable shifting just a little bit together, a little bit closer. And if you have any responses to each other, and also Rana, if you Krista, if you can help call our attention if Rana raises her hand, because I'll be looking both directions. I don't want to miss Rana just because you're online, but definitely
Okay,
please.
sounds good.
Rana, we want you as part of this discussion as well.
Yeah.
So any initial thoughts, feedback, questions, reflections? Rana, you left us on it also an incredible note because you drew on the individual presentations. And thinking about sort of this moment, and you ended on a note around the limits and bounds and not bounded, like boundless. That might be something that we might kind of think about. I think all the presentations that we heard in one way or another actually engage that kind of predicament, if you will, and the possibilities.
Speak loud,
Mhm.
because the microphone is away from you. And you may want to take your mask down when you speak. Make sure it's down. And if we get a question from the audience, please repeat it because the remote people can't hear it.
Will do.
Thank you.
There are several people on Zoom who have their hand raised, so at the appropriate time, feel free to call on them. And Faisal, I'll count on you to do that.
We'll hold off on that. We're going to have the presenters talk for a while and then we'll open it up.
Sure, no problem. I'm just letting you know.
Thank you.
Well, I could start with a thank you. Again, a very big mahalo for these conversations. And I guess one thing I want to pick up on is this idea of moving beyond the institutional work, which is so important and such an incredible gift, at Birzeit to Palestinians, And yet you note sort of the challenges of that work, Rana, of working within an institution, not wanting things to become stale, and wanting to think beyond the boundaries of the museum. I think that's so powerful for us. In very different ways, we struggle to keep our institutional work lively and meaningful as we work on Palestine and teach on Palestine. And I also want to say that I'm really moved and heartened by thinking about boycott work as not only about the wins, but about the process and the friendship and the solidarities that happen along the way. I'll just say that because the American Anthropological Association is moving towards another vote. So if there's any anthropologists out there, the vote is in June. And it's our chance to, see that work come to fruition. And absolutely, I feel that more than a decade of work in a way of institution building and conversations has been leading to this moment, and has not, we need to win the vote. But we've also learned a lot along the way, and I'm grateful for that. And it was so incredible to hear that song and thinking about raising the flag at Mostabia and thinking about re-enlivening a vision of a full Palestine and thinking about what's going on right now in Palestine is a riveting and always important thing. So thank you so much.
Thank you all. A couple of things that that our conversation has really made me reflect on are, the very real differences in the material stakes of the struggles that we're engaged in our different positionalities. Rana, you talked about being in Palestine, about being at Birzeit, a space that has been the site of ongoing invasion by military authorities, a site where students and faculty are systematically targeted by colonial violence and have their education disrupted on an ongoing basis. And for those of us positioned across the United States, Turtle Island, we feel the material effects of Zionist violence in different scales, right? We're not directly confronting military violence, but we see how Zionism as an ideology and as a political project traverses geographies. And that makes us really have to think collectively about these different spaces and conversation. I'm also really reflecting on the ways that all of us to some degree have really uplifted these sort of everyday effective sites of struggle as an integral part of the process. And I think that goes back to the fact that our senses, our love and care for each other, our relationships to each other and to the land are so central to our ongoing struggle against settler colonialism. So I'll just stop there and let somebody else.
Rana, do you want to jump in?
I just wanted to, everybody's lived this sort of Zoom experience over the last 2 years. And it feels like we're leaving it, but we're not. And so I just want to remind everybody in the room that this kind of Zoom is a burden, but it's also a way to bring our voices together. And it's one of those living contradictions, I think. I can't be there, but, and maybe some of you can't be here. So I think today is an exercise, right? It's part of this praxis of trying to think about what Amal was talking about is gathering. Physical gathering isn't always easy, but how do we reimagine that? And through our reimaginings of these gatherings, how does that become part of our conversation? And how does this conversation amongst us today become part of our own work? Like, we're not just reflecting what we have done, but we're thinking together about what we will do. And I think that's, as alienating as it is to be the little computer amongst these four audacious women that are in front of me, it's also empowering. And so I want to thank you for bringing my little, computer, and I see my big head behind you over you. So I think today I'm thinking of today as kind of a practice and an exercise of what we're doing, right? This is part of the everyday. And And so I hope some of the sounds from the neighborhood are coming through, because that's, that's part of gathering, right, Amal?
Absolutely, thank you. And no. Just, I love the idea of this as sort of how does this become part of what we continue to do our praxis? So thank you for that.
I'll just add one thing about that I thought was a kind of through line, which is just in the face of really horrific violence, that the response to that, that's kind of small acts of friendship and connection and daily practices, whether they be going to a protest or coming together like this, or, the kind of conversations that happened before this are part of, they matter. Because sometimes it's really easy to feel total despair. And like what do you do in the face of all this, kind of knowing that there's this military might that is just exerting these horrific forms of violence. And so it's gatherings like this that I think give hope, but I also think that they matter. All right, I have to think that they matter in terms, and because they're bigger, I feel like there's more staying power in those than the kinds of military violence that as relentless as it is.
Which one? You want to say something?
Okay.
I guess I would just add maybe something on that note, which is kind of intersects with that in terms of the gatherings and the movement building, right? As Amal said, AAA wants the vote, right? We want the resolution to pass, but also it's the mobilizing work and it's the education on the ground. I mean, even if the resolution had not passed the American Studies Association, there were so many people who got on board with the issue because they had to confront it for the first time. And they also saw how dirty and how really the smear tactics really made people who didn't want to touch this kind of political hot potato go, wait, that's a scholar whose work actually deals with colonialism, and they're bashing people who are actually trying to identify what's going on there, and really just kind of smoked out, if you will. Maybe that's not the greatest metaphor, but it really drew out people who were liberal Zionists as well, not necessarily the usual suspects, and really have to when the rubber hits the road, find out where people stand ethically, and then linking it to the epistemological questions of our field. Knowledge production matters. And so really understanding, some people said, well, I thought this is a scholarly association. Why are we doing politics? And it's like, what kind of scholarship are you doing? And it is in American studies, it's always already going to have political implications. This is the United States of America, after all. And so part of it is, I think, the education on the ground and what it meant for colleagues to actually have those confrontations and conversations and build kind of capacity, political, ethical, intellectual capacity. And I think that is really important in terms of mobilizing on the ground, that there's so much that can shift with that, whether the resolution it's a win, but also so much can happen either way. I think it's really important. It has changed the face of the field of American studies as just one small example with that. Let's see, any other comments from our panelists, and otherwise we can open it up to audience members here at the museum, and we can check the Q&A on the Zoom.
If I could just pop in just for one thing, Kaholani, this is something that I think Sara, Cindy, Kaholani, Amal, and I know about each other, but it's great that we get to share this with with the people on Zoom and people in the audience there, is that I hope it's clear that we're in conversation, right? Tonight we came together, but I'm constantly, and this is not, I think if anybody hears us or listens to us or reads our work, they can tell that we're affected by each other. And I think that's the kind of scholarship, Kaholani, that you're talking about. It's about politics, but it's also about reciprocity and mutual learning together, right? So I hope that that's clear to the audience, is that we're not only here, this isn't just a performance, right? we actively read each other and learn from each other. And that's been, that's been my coming of age, as it were, over the last decade. I've learned from every person on this panel, and I hope that I hope that that comes through as part of the exercise of what we're doing as far as practice goes. We're not just listening to each other today. I think it's clear from what everybody said is that we're actually on the learning from each other is also ongoing. So I hope that that's something that I wanted to make clear.
Here, here.
Yes.
Thank you. Any questions from our audience? Yes, hi.
Hi, I'm Leslie. I'm from Hartford, and thank you so much and for all the books you've written and everything. Some of you have written a lot. It's awesome. I'm here today because I'm very aware of what's going on in our country with white supremacy and everything we've been through. And I really try to educate myself about Israel and Palestine. I was there in the 80s as a Christian. And I just find it so confusing. So one, I could use some guidance on what to follow because our media forget. And I like the way you talked about Zionism versus Jewish people, separating that really helps some of my thinking. Because I just feel like, particularly white people, I think my black friends get it from a global perspective of racism and oppression. But a lot of my white friends, I think, because we have such a big Jewish community in our area, I just think everybody's just not even dealing with it or thinking about it because it's all so confusing. And of course, it has been a lot of righteous conservative violence and everything, so that gets our attention. But I think it's like, what's the answer? What's all that dialogue. And secondly, just briefly, Reverend Barber, who's with the Moral Monday, I think he started out of South Carolina. They now have a new Center for Public Policy. It's a Black man that's led Poor People's Campaign. And I just quickly Googled, he has talked about Palestine. I don't know how, local he is, but he might be a good contact for the museum or whatever. I went to Yale Divinity School, and believe me, this is like a revolution. It's actually not that, radical. Feels radical, but we'll see. So, thank you.
And for people on Zoom, I was asked to repeat. To repeat the questions, just so you have a sense of what came from the audience. So if I can recall correctly, there was a comment about the heightened levels of white supremacism in this country and thinking about media and which media to follow. And also looking at the being really clear, and a thanks for the reminder of uncoupling and not conflating or confusing Judaism with Zionism. Mm-hmm. And then the second comment was about looking at the work of Reverend Barber in terms of his acknowledgement and speaking about Palestine, and that is a potential sort of way to think about building solidarity and capacity as another part of challenging white supremacism here with rightist nationalism. And you didn't necessarily say it, but I would say, we're looking at the intensification of a Christian white supremacist nationalism tightening with fascism in this country.
You really did a good job.
Any responses to that around media?
All.
It's written on media.
I think. I think there's, I have to say, I was thinking, we can think about great critical media. I have to say, I kept thinking about this Muhammad al-Qurd poem that I've been reading recently about allowing for anger. When we were talking about the importance of thinking about rage as part of our, you're talking about rage as part of a practice of love. I think looking to some of the really exciting new voices and beyond maybe just the daily news, we need to keep track of the daily news. But, actually Muhammad al-Qurd writes for The Nation. So I think that's one place to look. There's outlets like the Electronic Intifada and Plus 972 that do the, some of the breaking news stuff well. I don't know whether Al Jazeera does the breaking news stuff well. Where else do we like to look for those kind of updates? I mean, so much of it honestly is finding a good feed on Instagram or Twitter that you can trust.
Mondaweiss.
Absolutely Mondaweiss. Yeah.
Miriam Barghouti.
Very impressive.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
Yara
yeah.
Hawari, yeah.
Say again. the other
Oh,
one?
Yara Hawari
Oh,
and El
yeah, I'm gonna
Shabaka.
mention.
They're the Palestinian Policy Network. So it's not so much news, but they do a number of kind of policy briefs that really give you a greater depth into some of the issues. But I think it's important to say as well, Leslie, you know, and I appreciate your question that, right, this is made to be or to feel confusing by design, right? That there are various powers that, as many folks have explored, are working to actively suppress Palestinian narratives, not only in our classrooms, but in newsrooms and so forth across the country. And that's something that we need to actively combat as well.
I want to also add two sources. One is the Institute for Middle East Understanding, IMEU. They're great at dispelling myths whenever there is something going on in the moment. So what they'll do is they'll take an example of what's just been happening at Al-Aqsa, and they'll do sort of an unpacking of the mythologies of that. And also want to acknowledge the work of Luann Villani Heller and Stanley Heller, who are here with the Middle East Crisis Committee for years. Is it 15 years doing the struggle?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the video, the weekly show, yes.
There's an independent cable television show that they produce called The Struggle, and that you can see of for Middle East Crisis Committee that has a lot of coverage on Palestine, but the broader issues of the Middle East and a critical voice on US imperialism in the Middle East. And so I encourage you to look at that. And also there's resources for gathering and protest and rallies and meetings and different kinds of educational fora. So that's great for people who are locally here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Great.
If I could just add, Sara mentioned the Palestine Feminist Collective and Amal mentioned Instagram. Palestine Feminist Collective has an action this year where they have a calendar. So if you follow them on Instagram, there's basically almost every day. It's ridiculous and it's an incredible amount of work that's put into this. And so every day, if you follow them on Instagram or follow them, you can see that there's it's a calendar and it's an educational tool. It's the calendar where every day something is celebrated, commemorated and celebrated. So if you follow just the Palestine Feminist Collective on Instagram, you'll see, you know, it's a daily education.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's incredible.
Yeah, thanks for the shout out, Emma.
So Krista, if I'm not mistaken, we have 3 questions in the Q&A. Would you be willing to read those for us, please?
Sure. I was actually going to start to build off of, first of all, this event shows how powerful it is to come together. And Rana, you talked about how the Birzeit Museum defies borders and divisions by, you know, hosting exhibits in spite of the inability of people to travel. One of our viewers is asking, what other ways can Palestinians and people who are in solidarity with Palestine, how can they defy the intentional divisions and the challenges of crossing borders? Besides the incredible examples that you've given, of course, today.
You, Faisal?
Contribute?
Sure, certainly.
Yeah.
My head, they were young.
Our director of the museum has an answer to that.
I think we all recognize as Palestinians, we're challenged geographically because our enemy has sliced us into so many different pieces, and we have no way of gathering together in one place. You know, we're in Gaza, we're in the West Bank. Even in the West Bank, we're in so many different jurisdictions and lines and checkpoints, and we're in Jordan, and we're in Syria, we're in Lebanon, we're in Europe, or in the United States. So we're totally challenged geographically, and our strategy is to try to rise above and transcend the geography and go to the cyberspace and create Palestine in cyberspace, because in cyberspace we can be one nation and we could be the first cyberspace nation. I did give a talk about that a couple of times, and it's a subject close to my heart, and I hope to address people about it in the future.
I think that's one of the benefits of COVID is that I think we're all way more comfortable coming together in a virtual space. Of course, that doesn't negate the need to be able to get to the point where we can gather in person, where we choose, not where others choose for us. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I can just add quickly. So that's such a great and important question. I do think like, the digital world allows for these kinds of connections to happen. And so do and it can happen in so many different ways. I guess what I would say, kind of echoing some of what Rana said, is that whenever we gather, whether it's in a protest or a commemoration or a digital space or a classroom or a lecture, like that we be really aware of the circumstances under which we gather, right? So the fact that there's an exhibition where the artist can't enter Palestine and the curator can't leave, like that is constitutive. And we need to understand the politics and the power involved in each of our gatherings, right? So I guess that's just something I would add quickly on that.
Gets to your point about the material differences in the politics of location.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that I might add is for those of us who have, kind of different forms of privilege, access to money to bring Palestinian visitors and create occasions for gathering. And, I think that those kind of things can lead to forms of community building and just to kind of think about occasions, creating occasions to gather that aren't always like Nakba Day or things that are marking forms of violence and dispossession, but sometimes occasions that are, about like a solidarity gathering or just things that are more joyous or celebratory, but that also create connections, including among people that might be right around you that might come out for those things. Yeah, just
But never are these gatherings in replacement of returning to the land of Palestine.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that, Rana, and bringing us back to land. But also, I just want to add that that you can begin wherever you are, wherever you're situated, that because Palestine is so deeply interconnected with all of these other struggles, that struggling against racism wherever you are is interconnected with the struggle to free Palestine, that struggling against homophobia, struggling for trans rights is deeply interconnected with the struggle for Palestinian liberation.
Yes.
When we recognize that our freedom is intertwined, that our freedom from these broader colonial logics that oppress us all is deeply intertwined, then we can understand that we have to begin wherever we are, in whatever community we are, wherever we're located, and that that's the place to begin.
Okay. Any other questions? We've got more questions on the Zoom, but from the audience, yes, Stan Heller.
A comment, Stan Heller from the Middle East Crisis Committee, and our site is thestruggle.video.org. I want to talk about success because in all these efforts over the years, and I've been doing this for decades, it seems so hopeless. You have to fight all the politicians and the violence and the lawfare and everything else. Two signs of success. One, among the left. When I started back in 1982, Palestine was incredibly controversial on the left. There was a demonstration in Central Park, New York, about nuclear weapons. 1 million people were at that demonstration. And Israel was invading Lebanon at the same time. And the people who were in charge of the demonstration refused to let anyone say anything about Palestine. Now, among the left, which is deeply fractured, Palestine is an absolute given as a cause for justice. Second thing of success is on the matter of the Democratic Party in the United States, a poll that was done within the last month. And they said, do you feel more sympathetic to the Palestinians or the Israelis? And I've seen this question, for year after year. They said 49% for the Israelis. And they got ready for the next number. I'm sorry, I already blew it. 49% for the Palestinians. So it was pretty interesting. 38% for the Israelis. Among younger people, younger Democrats, this isn't the country as a whole, but it was even more. So that's a, you know, sort of a factual measure of success. I also want to warn about something about attempts to rewrite history. There's a woman named Huwaida Araf, a Palestinian American lawyer and activist. And so she was asked to give a talk in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, near where she lives, about her life. So it was diversity week at the high school there. So she was one of the speakers and she spoke, and you know, she talked about things about growing up and all that. She didn't think much of it. And then the next day, the hammer gets thrust down with a vengeance. And she's called every name in the book anti-Semite, of course. And then one of the things was that she was an organizer of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla. And the most remarkable explanation of this was in the Zionist Organization of America article in Michigan, which said that this was an armed attack on Israeli weapons inspectors. I mean, incredible. This is now, it goes back 13 years. So, you know, it seems ancient history, especially for young people. But these were people bringing humanitarian goods to Palestine, trying to get to Gaza. And they had all been minutely inspected by Turkish authorities. And they're coming and they're attacked on high seas. There's no arms inspectors. It was Israeli commandos who rappelled down from helicopters and who shot people dead even before they got to the ground. And they ended up killing, I think it was 10 people. So people have to be very careful to see these attempts by powerful forces to rewrite the past, even things like the amazing Gaza Freedom Flotilla.
Thank you, Stanley. I might also I wanted to just add one thing to build on this thread that's come through, and also on what you put out there, Sarah, is really looking at, and it goes to the new generation that you're speaking to, Stanley, and that is, we look at the Palestine youth movement, for example. They're doing incredible work linking the pushback against tribal sovereignty in the US, the attack on trans rights and the violence against trans people, and anti-Black racism, and the white supremacist murder with impunity, the murder of Black people in this country, and connecting that to Palestine freedom. And that's really where it's at. And I think that is the issue, is that, you know, there used to be the saying, progressive accept Palestine. And you had Palestinians critiquing that, say, well, we understand the sort of rhetorics of that statement, but that's not progressive then, right? None of the people saying, well, we're not progressives anyway, we're radicals. In a good sense, you know, I mean that as in a leftist sense of leftist radicalism, but the idea is to really link these issues. And I think that that's happening more and more, and that Palestine is a given, or should be a given, and is treated as such, but also linking it to what we're seeing in this country right now, which is just this heightened anti-Black violence and heightened anti-trans violence. And then where do you think, you know, was the attack on people who have birthing capacity, and the attack on reproductive rights, and the attack on tribal sovereignty, and the kind of ongoing extractive violence on the land, and the criminalization of land protectors. Any other questions from the audience here at this time? Yes, hi.
Yes. I'm very proud of you. Just wonderful ladies, intelligent, and just made me very emotional to hear you talk about this issue. I have a question. Are we here in the right place to elaborate on Palestine. When our president said that he is a Zionist, that you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. We love Jews, we love Christians, we love everybody. But Zionism is different. And when our president is, wants to be elected or want to be re-elected, and he buys this kind of votes by saying he's a Zionist, are we in the right place to say we're collaborating for Palestine? Now the world is changing, whether we like it or not. Now they say we're not the greatest power. Maybe we are now, but in the near future, maybe we're not going to be. Are we collaborating with other places in the world for Palestine? Or are we only thinking about the United States, United Kingdom, which are actually historically have not done much, although they gave a lot of lip service sometimes. So this.
And for those on Zoom, I'll try to recap that. It's so eloquent and elegant. It might be challenging for me, but if I understood correctly, really questioning whether we're in the right place to do this work, both not just institutionally, but thinking about our social location in the United States, and also President Biden identifying as a Zionist and pointing out that one need not be Jewish to be a Zionist. And I would add to that, one doesn't need to be a Christian evangelical to be a Zionist. And we see people abiding by a Zionist ideology, regardless of their religious faith, and across a really, unfortunately, a really broad spectrum of political identification. But what I've loved, what I was hearing coming through your comments is really challenging whether or not the US is still the global hegemon, and also to try and decenter the role of the US, or the place, not letting them off the hook for their role, but the place of the US and the UK as the main actors in this, and thinking about building collaborative solidarities within and outside and beyond. Is that a recap? Some comments in response to that?
I'll just say briefly that I think one thing is, I mean, this is where it's where I am a lot of the time, or almost all the time, right? And so from that perspective, I think it's the right place for me to be and work, right? And even with regards to the media question, like I learn a lot from Mass Peace Action and from other local organizations who like send out a weekly fact about water apartheid. Shout out to the Alliance for Water Justice, So I think in some ways, like cultivating local atmospheres where we're struggling for justice across multiple issues is itself really, really important. And I will also say that I see Palestinians also turning beyond the United States, thinking about, traveling to South Africa and thinking against apartheid through that lens, traveling to Ireland, and making those other alliances. So I think you're absolutely right that moving beyond sort of a focus on the US is important, but also that for me as a person who spends so much time here, this remains, important for that reason, because it can help me link to local struggles for justice.
Yes.
That's what I was saying.
No, thank you for this beautiful question and provocation. I think to add to what Amal has already said, yes, absolutely. Solidarity with global movements of indigenous people, of racialized people, anti-colonial solidarities across the globe has always been obviously a central aspect of our liberation struggle. But Israel could not be continuing its ongoing project of settler colonialism in Palestine if it were not for the enormity of funding for military support alongside its ideological support. So I think in that sense, we have to continue doing the organizing work wherever we are situated in the United States to try to bring an end to that military funding, right? As one small part. I think the other thing I want to say is that Palestine, yes, we have a deep attachment and a commitment to return to our homeland, and land is central in our liberatory struggle. But also Palestine exists wherever we exist as Palestinians. And we have such rich and diverse communities of Palestinians in the United States, alongside Palestinian communities across the Shatat, right, which is still expanding. So, can we be in solidarity with ourselves, right? We can continue to do the organizing work that we need to do, in solidarity with our folks who are back home, but we also have our own healing and liberatory work that we need to continue to do within our own communities. So I'll stop there.
And if I could just add one line to what Amal and Sada were saying, is that we're part of a historical legacy that is thinking about this. I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel. We are a fourth generation of people, Palestinians, in solidarity with ourselves in the Shadat, and also with what Sada just beautifully described as liberation being intertwined. So this is generations worth of work, and we have a really rich and historical legacy when it comes to this kind of solidarity work.
Okay, let's take another, Krista, may I ask, could you read 2 questions in a row?
Yeah, I'll do that.
And then the last 2?
Okay, one of them is, in my experience, these peace in the Middle East and Palestine solidarity groups are filled with moles and unbelievable internal sabotage. It's so bad that I've seen groups with huge amounts of money and support that dismember within 2 years and never accomplish anything. How do you recommend overcoming these internal obstacles? And the other question is in the chat. It's a comment, and then it gets at ethnic cleansing and how to deal with that. So important to recognize the Z word as well as the C word for capitalism. Is there any revolutionary movement of Palestinian and Israeli workers to establish one communist society? It looks like Israel's trying to provoke a war to legitimately cleanse all Palestinians. How can people fight that? And I think the important focus for that last question is really, since Israel's inception, the effort to legalize the dispossession of Palestinians from their land and every other law that challenges Palestinian life, to put it simply.
Okay, thank you, Krista. Just actually, I'm looking at the time. Could you read the last questions, and we won't take any more on the feed, and that way our
yeah, I don't see any other questions. Honestly, they're comments.
Okay,
so
great.
I think that will do it.
Thank you. So there's a lot there.
I'll say something about moles and kind of the importance in some ways that it speaks to some of the things we've been talking about, which is our connections to each other and the importance in organizing of actually knowing the people that you're organizing with.
Yes.
And then just having different layers, right? You have people that you know and trust, and those are people you talk to. And then you have another layer of people that you can invite out to come to public things. And, you know, I think it's about kind of concentric circles in a way. And I mean, this is something I feel like I learned so much about in Hawaii in terms of like organizing for Mauna Kea. That also included not everyone needs to know everything, even if you do have trusted relations. As someone who is an outsider to that struggle in so many ways, there are just things that it was not my place to know. I didn't need to know those things, but I was told when and where I could show up. And I feel like that's a kind of model, you know, of course, you can never fully prevent these things, but if you have organizing that is premised on relations to each other, it really, you know, kind of lessens the chances of that kind of thing happening. So I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
It's beautifully said. Yeah. Any response to the other questions or comments that came up?
I think Rhonda.
I could just I don't want to respond to Workers of the World Uniting, but I will respond to the fact that you might not get this news there because I don't know what is filtered in and out, but the last year, and particularly since 2021, civil society in Palestine writ large, in all of the fragmented parts of Palestine there's been a huge uprising, and this year has witnessed some of the longest and most righteous strikes. The teachers union is striking, the lawyers union is striking. So there's just constant strikes, and those strikes are about mobilization on the streets, but it also speaks to the kind of political landscape, in particular in the West Bank right now, and the co-opted, and the governance that is a co-opted part of settler colonial rule here. So there's a lot going on, and mobilization it speaks to what Cindy was talking about earlier. It's not, there are moments, but there's a lot going on in the everyday, and 2023 has been, the streets have witnessed this.
Thank you, Rana.
Just thank you again to everyone who showed up today. And I'd also like to replug again the Palestinian Feminist Collective. You can follow us at Palestinian Feminist Collective on Instagram or at PalestinianFeministCollective.org. We have a number of amazing events coming up. In April 29th and April 30th, we're doing a 2-day symposium on Palestinian women political prisoners. We have scholars, we have activists, we have poets, and former political prisoners on the ground who will teach us about the struggle to free Palestinian women prisoners. So please join us on those days.
Okay, great. Thank you very much to everyone who attended. Thank you for tuning in on Zoom. We are over time, so I think we'll draw the program to a close. And this has been streaming live on Facebook. So if you know somebody that didn't get to watch it, they can access it there. And did you want to put a close on it? So thank you again. And thanks to our presenter.
You could disconnect that. It doesn't need connected. Don't go yet.
And Rana, if you'll stay on so we can do a photo with you.
Yes. Thanks to everyone. I'd like to thank our distinguished panel here very much for participating, organizing this wonderful event. The museum is open for anybody who would like to come and put events on here. We host all kinds of events, and at the end of the month, we are going to host a play that was canceled somewhere else. We will be sending promotions about it. We're also putting on a huge exhibition in Venice, Italy, opens May 20th. The title of it, From Palestine, Our Past, Our Future, and it deals with the 437 depopulated and destroyed villages in Palestine. Now we will be presenting an animation of the Nakba, which was never done before, where you're going to see a map of Palestine, and every day during 1948, you're going to see the villages that were depopulated and demolished tick on the map, and you see the area on the map, one after another, until you see 437 villages. And when the map gets filled with colors, and it's color coded for massacres, at gunpoint eviction, and psychological warfare eviction. It's some work that has never been done before. This will be exhibited in Venice, and we will also be sharing it at that point very, very broadly. Thank you again, and we will see everybody again. Don't leave yet. Take a look through the museum if you haven't, and we're going to take some pictures also.
Okay, great.
Krista, thank you so much for holding the fort.
Thank you, Krista.
And
Thank you, everyone. It was an incredible event.
And we'll see everybody next week. Tomorrow we're off because it's Easter, and we've done 2 events today. So
Oh, we're gonna have Rana in a photo, so if we can pin her.
yeah.
And then we'll do that in this front of the screen.
Yeah, hold on a second. They're on the big screen.
Yeah.
there. Okay.
Okay, let's get a photo.
Rana, we need to talk, Rana.
Sure.
There's a lot of things we can cooperate on.
Yes.
I've tried getting hold of you at one point. Yeah. Yes. Richard, email me, I'll send it to you. My card is there on the corner by the guest book. And I will send it. Okay. Stand by for a moment.
Hey, Rana, hi, we're getting everybody back up. Let's take a look at the participants. We still got a few people on here. Okay, 1 second. We still have people still on. Hello. Okay, Amal and Sarah, can we do a photo with Rana up front?
Don't have to wait around on Zoom.
Yes, it's late her time to sleep. Recover on the health front.
I was gonna say, let me go to bed.
Yeah, isn't it 11 o'clock there?
Well, it's 11 o'clock in Jerusalem and 10 o'clock in Ramallah.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, move back against the wall.
Nice. Or maybe we can sit. Oh, that's the way. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that's the way.
Yeah, sit.
Now we can sit on this.
It's very tight.
Sorry about that.
It's very tight.
Hot mask on us.
Tighter, tighter. You move the chairs closer. I want in the middle there. A couple more.
That's good.
Okay,
Okay, wait,
so
let's look at the same camera at once. We don't have
yeah,
photos.
look at me here.
Let's look, wait, hold on, Stan, just wait.
Yeah, I
Stan's-
won't snap.
Okay.
Take your masks off. Here we go. 1 second. All right, let me just see. Good, 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 good.
Okay, we'll look at Stanley now.
You're getting on 100 megapixels here.
Thank you. Thanks, Stan. Thank you. Bye.
All right, so.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Take care.
Sleep
Sleep
smart.
well. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Good night.
Good to
Good
see you.
night.
Good to sign out too.
Bye,
everyone.
Bye bye. Good night,
Allah
everybody.
Yasarmak. Bye.
Hello. Okay, we're signing off here at the museum. Assalam, everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you, Krista.